everything you need to know about the Amazon loop. Before I start, I do want to talk about some of the things that I did at Amazon. I was at Amazon for 8 years in recruiting, recruited everything from warehouse associates, product managers, software developers, program managers, and even executives at the company. I was a bar raiser for 5 years there, and I had an opportunity to get a very unique perspective about interviewing at Amazon. So I want to start just talking about the Amazon hiring bar. So when I'm doing my coaching, and I'm doing my coaching sessions with people, the number one question I get is the mystique around the Amazon hiring bar. What is it, and why is it so opaque in its approach, and understanding why it's difficult to get there. Most people, when they look at the Amazon hiring bar, they think, okay, they're interviewing 5 or 6 people, and they're going to choose me out of those 5 or 6 people. That's actually not the case. Amazon, what they do is they look at, are you better than 50% of the people currently in that role? And do you raise the overall effectiveness of that group? So you're actually interviewing against the people that you're going to be peers with. And a lot of people will come to the interview, especially if they don't have a coach or they haven't prepared, and they will, not bring their best examples. And Anna mentioned it at the very beginning about transactional versus transformational. So I always challenge people when they start to interview to bring those transformational examples, bring your career defining moments, bring your examples that you're most proud of, so that you can raise that bar, and so that you're bringing the best examples to the table and being the best candidate. The other thing is, do you have upside potential? Do you have long-term impact, right? So what Amazon is really looking for is, they're looking for, hey, can I put this person on the next Alexa? Can I put this person on the next Kindle? And can they run that project? Can they facilitate that? Can they be what they like to fondly call the Amazon athlete? Someone that's not just specific subject matter expert in one area. They have a broad skill set where they can will things to work, bring people together, and work cross-functionally. So that's the Amazon hiring bar. And typically what Amazon looks for. You have to match these 2 criteria if they want to move forward and make a hiring decision. And do we have any questions in the chat before I move forward?
Not yet. So I believe we can move forward for now.
Great. So there's 2 pillars of interviewing at Amazon. One pillar is content. The other pillar is delivery. And the content is something that it's what you're bringing, right? It's the example itself. And if your content, again, if it's a transactional amount of content, then it's not going to do well. Usually, the example has two things that can happen to it, right? Either the content is not big enough, and that's the case where, as a coach, I will tell you, I'll say, okay, we have to throw that away, right? That's just not going to work. It's not going to raise the bar at Amazon, and it's not there. The other piece is the person, and this is a majority of the time, they may have a really good example, and an example that's there and it's available, but they're not articulating the content in the right way that shows the scope and the breadth of that example. For example, I had someone recently who they gave me an example, and I was about to tell them to throw it away, but as I dove deeper into that content and learn more, I noticed that they had influenced the CPO of their company with data that allowed them to get headcount to run a massive project in massive scale that basically led revenue of over $10 million. That's big content. So a lot of times it's people who that don't get the job are just not selling themselves the correct way. They're not articulating themselves the correct way. And what I do with my coaching sessions is I really extract that information out so that we can make sure that they're putting that there, and we're setting them up for success, and they are getting that content that will get them to offer, right? And we're getting to that transformational piece versus the transactional piece. So that's content. The next is delivery. So delivery is a lot of things. Delivery is your background, your attire, your lighting, and that's what I like to call positive unconscious biases, which is a whole different scenario. But the majority of what delivery is your communication style. I have a range that of the 1,000 interviews I've done, my vague to verbose range. And every person, when they're communicating, we could be talking interpersonally and things are fine. But when you're telling an example and you're telling a story, that's a different vehicle for communicating. And people tend to either lean one way or the other. People who are vague tend to not do as well because they're not giving as many data points. And those data points differentiate getting to a hiring decision, because Amazon is notorious for not wanting to hire the best person for the role, but not hiring the wrong person for the role. So if you're vague and you don't have those data points, they're going to be on the fence and they're not going to hire you. And on the verbose side, people actually will get the job from time to time. People who are verbose, who are telling compelling and engaging stories, will get the job. But majority of the time, those verbose individuals tend to be long-winded and be exhausting, and they typically don't get the role. So the goal is you want to be somewhere in the middle, almost leaning towards verbose, giving enough data points, telling a compelling story, telling an engaging story. And again, it's different from interpersonal communication. So if you're not a good storyteller, that can be difficult. And that's something I work on in my coaching calls, is how you can combine the two, the content and the delivery, and create a masterpiece so that you can get the job. Anna, checking in.
Yes, sorry. I was actually going to ask your question. How long do you think an optimal story should be?
So that's a good question, right? So it depends on the story itself. I've seen people who've gone into verbose explanations in their stories, and that might be their communication style, and they give really good engaging stories. And it also depends on the level, right? So if you're talking about an executive candidate, those stories can go deeper and more wider than someone who might be interviewing for an internship or an entry-level position. Rule of thumb is you want to stay between 3 to 5 minutes. Now, if you go beyond that, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, right? It's a very ambiguous style of interviewing when you're doing behavioral interviewing, but as long as you stay within that 3 to 5, that's a good rule of thumb. But if you're doing that at the sake of really compelling details that will actually get you the job, then it's okay to go past that.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I always try to stick to the 3 minutes, actually, because what I realize with loads of my candidates is that when it goes to the 5 mark, however complex it is and whatever level they go in for, it's hard to keep engagement.
You're right.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, last thing you want is the eyes to glaze over, right? But at the same end of the spectrum, right? If you're talking about tech, or you're talking about something it's hardcore tech, and you're talking about a machine learning operation or machine learning kind of project, those can go deeper, and they require that deeper level of communication. So you're right, especially on the non-tech side. I would say you're pretty right on the money with that 4 minute mark, but I would say, and that's a good reason to hire a coach, is because you could be at that 5 minute mark and it'd be like, okay, that's appropriate, or you could be that 5 minute mark and all of a sudden it's like, you've lost your audience and they don't care about the story as much anymore. So I think it's ebb and flow, but yeah, you're right. A good rule of thumb, 3 to 5, 4. And then, if you go past that, then, obviously it's discretion of the coach and discretion of the interviewer.
We actually have a question because you mentioned about the hiring bar before. And Jeffries is asking, how does Amazon objectively determine how candidate will raise the bar? I think that's quite a good question. Yeah,
that is a good question. And ultimately, the question that I would ask as a bar raiser, especially if we're on the fence, is, so let's say, for example, you have 3 people who like the person, 3 people who don't, and we're at a standstill. So as a bar raiser's job, your job is to ask bottom line questions to really determine that person's scope, that person's impact. So I usually ask the question, I say, okay, first of all, Mr. Hiring Manager, do we think this person raises the overall effectiveness of the role, in the team? If the answer is yes, then I say, okay, let's talk, what concerns do you have? And when I have those concerns, I say, okay, what superpowers does this person have? And does that address the risk that you see today? And if they say yes, then I say, okay, well, are you willing to fight for this person? Will you please fight for this person? And then usually they give me data points and say that this is why. And usually at that point, everyone disagrees and commits and says, okay, it's obvious that the hiring manager really wants this person. It's obviously have what is necessary. And then we will then move to an offer. Other ways that we objectively, or Amazon objectively looks at the hiring bar is they will look at the leadership principles, and they allow each person who puts in a vote a mild strength, a mild concern, or concern. And basically they look at those leadership principles, and leadership principles are the guide for everything in Amazon. And they take those and they basically analyze those, and they say, do the risks outweigh the strengths? And if they do, then they'll move not inclined every time. And then they say, do the strengths outweigh the concerns? And do these have a place in making an impact for us in the future? And if they do, then they typically move forward to hire. Hopefully that answers your question.
Let's hope it wasn't my question. Great. I don't think we have anyone else commenting now. We actually had just one more, and I thought I was going to answer it live, but I clicked on the wrong thing, so sorry. The question was about if someone get last minute coaching. I can actually answer that on behalf of Carrus. We do have a lot of coaches who would do last minute stuff. So I will link at the end of this webinar different links to the chat where you could, the audience could access different discounts and all sorts of coaches on the platform. So Eric, back to you.
Awesome. So Amazon uses behavioral interviewing. Most FANG companies do behavioral interviewing. Apple, Facebook, Google, all of them use this format. Basically what they're doing is they're taking your past examples, putting them under a microscope and dropping them in the future of that company and say, do these examples in the future create impact here, right? So they do that using the STAR format. The STAR format basically is it's the textbook behavioral style: situation, task, action, and result, right? And this is usually where you tell in that result statement, like, what is the impact of what that person did? Did they increase revenue? Did they increase profit? Did they decrease risk? All that's very important in the STAR method, and understanding if that person does raise a bar and putting those examples under that microscope. Where I see a lot of people at Amazon not do well is the peeling back the onion piece. So Amazon is notorious for peeling back the onion and asking a lot of follow-up questions. So you may have a really good cohesive narrative story where it shows you solving big problems, it shows you your contributions, it shows your impact, but then they start asking the follow-up questions, and this is where a lot of people will actually not do very well. So Amazon's a big believer in continuous improvement. So a lot of times they'll ask the question, what could you have done better here, right? And if you say, well, there's nothing I could have done better, that's not the right answer. You want to say something along the lines that's focused on continuous improvement, right? So this is what I would have done better if I could have done it again, and this is why. And then they may say, well, when those with that in mind and what you learned from it, how did you use that as a mechanism in the future for things that you did that were very similar, right? Because then they want to say, okay, oh, you did learn from it. Well, let's see it in action. How did you do it after that? They may ask other follow-up questions like, okay, you took a calculated risk. How did you mitigate that risk between customer need and with business need, right? You mentioned that you dove into the data. Can you walk me through how you dove data? So a lot of those things are trigger words. So when I was a bar raiser out here, dive deep or risk or things like that, and that would make me want to ask more questions. So your ability to pivot and reframe and really look close at your examples and understand what those follow-up questions might be are very helpful in you landing the job. And something that I do in my sessions is I ask a ton of follow-up questions, very similar to what a bar raiser or a fellow Amazonian would do, so that you can get more, heat and understand that heat and how to respond to it, and I can coach you through that. And then lastly is Amazon's whole interview is a risk mitigation process, right? They're very different from other companies. Other companies want to hire the best person for the job. They don't. They want to not hire the wrong person for the job. So they're okay every once in a while passing on a candidate that could potentially be good if they have risks associated with them in order to find a person that's not the bad person for the job, that has less risks and has just as much upside as that person and less polarizing.
When you say risks, what could you specify maybe? What sort of risks are we talking?
There's a lot, right? So, I mean, first thing, if the person has a risk on earned trust, majority of the time, they're not going to move forward. That means that the person has difficulty with stakeholders. That means there is a really big flag in how they manage a team. That means there's a really big flag on how they cross-functionally work with other teams. Earned trust is a big one. If you don't do well articulating how you earn trust, then that's usually the interview is usually over, because that means that this person just can't work with others, and that's usually a big thing. There's other risks like they didn't work backwards from the customer appropriately, which Amazon is very customer obsessed, as a lot of people know. For dive deep on a more technical role, if they noticed a discrepancy, but they didn't follow a good protocol, and in the follow-up questions, it gets found out, oh, you were kind of careless in those details, right? Is that somebody you want on your team? No, that's a risk, right? There could be a risk on ownership. I mean, I could go through all of them, right? But
yeah.
the thing is like, if there is a big risk called out, I mean, the bigger the risk, the more likely you're not going to hire the person, right? So you want to think about that with your examples, and if you have a good coach, that coach should be calling that out in your sessions, right? And you should be talking through that. Say, hey, this is how that come across. Let's not add that detail, or let's put that detail aside, because that's gonna rub them the wrong way.
Absolutely. And it's so funny that you mentioned earn trust first, because exactly what I was thinking, and this is what I tell to all of my clients, that earn trust basically is the one leadership principle that we just can't upskill you on. It's either you're trustworthy or you're not. And if there's a problem with that, that's a huge, huge flag. Great.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does Amazon ask? And I'll run through these very quickly. So Amazon asks, every leadership principle has a prototype code, right? And how you should answer it, and what they would expect, right? And it's like, what is considered Amazonian? And I'll go through a few of these. Obviously, the list is extensive, and this is not a comprehensive list by any means, but it's just to give you an example. So one of my favorite ones, and this is tied to customer obsession, is tell me about a time you had a difficult interaction with a stakeholder. What happened and what did you do? And the prototype example for this is you're coming into a situation where things are in disarray and things are not good. Your stakeholder doesn't trust you, but you come in and you ultimately earn that trust of the stakeholder by creating some kind of continuous improvement process, or creating some kind of mechanism that helps them build that trust over time. And whether that's through results, or influencing with data, or really helping them solve problems that they've had for a long time. In the end, you ultimately build that trust with that stakeholder despite the difficult interaction. That's typically the prototype there. Another one is, and this was tied to insist on high standard, is tell me about a time when you challenged the status quo. What was the status quo, and how did you challenge it? And this talks about how you have something where you've been doing the same thing over and over, and finally you say, you know what, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to create something that will allow us to work more efficiently or create bigger results, right? You may not have a reporting mechanism, and your stakeholders just keep asking for it, and they're very frustrated. Well, you decide to create a dashboard for that stakeholder, and ultimately allows them and several other business functions to cross-functionally use that dashboard. And now they have a reporting mechanism that allows your team to see the great work they're doing, and those frustrations are eased, right? So like, how are you elevating the team? How are you elevating your customers to a point where you're insisting on those high standards, right? The failure questions. So this is the most common one I get. Everyone has trouble answering the failure question. So tell me about a time you failed. Tell me about a time you made a bad decision. Tell me about a time you made an error in judgment. Or tell me about a time you got a critical piece of feedback. And people always come to me like, I don't know how to answer that. And first thing you gotta remember is it's kind of a trick question. They don't literally want you to tell them about the failure. They do, but they don't want you to end on it. And I see a lot of people who will say, here's when I failed, and then I failed. And then that's the end of the example. Well, you're definitely not getting a job if you do that. What they want to see is because remember, Amazon loves experiments, and experiments inherently fail, right? Think about Amazon's Fire Phone. Think about Amazon auctions. They don't exist anymore. Why? Because they failed. But they experimented and they learned from it, and it created Amazon Marketplace. And all that technology in Amazon phone is now in Alexa. So what they want to see is they want to see how you experiment, how you fail from those experiments or fail from that new thing that you were trying to do, but you learn from it. And when you learn from those failures, and then you incorporate that into something in the future, like a new process or something where people can blaze behind you and say, wow, this new process is very efficient. Thank you, Eric, for basically experimenting and finding out these new things despite those failures, and then you creating something new that creates impact. And that's for all the failure questions. If you can think of something where you experimented or where you challenged things that was new, those are the kind of examples that are really going to raise the bar at Amazon.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think I've got a slightly different view on that. It is important to sort of get that failure out of the way and have what you learned from it, what you have done differently, knowing what you know now. But what I see a lot of times is that people would present a what I call like a success in disguise. So they would literally bring a story because they just don't want to be proven wrong, obviously in an interview setting. So then they would bring something that literally turned out just going bad, amazing. Would you advise against that, or is it something that's not so bad?
So I call this the centerpiece of the example, right? So the centerpiece of the question. So the centerpiece of the question is, are you answering the question? Because people at Amazon are very direct. They'll say, you didn't answer my question if you don't answer the question, right? So if you address the centerpiece of the question and you make it pivotal around the failure, right? In the failure that ends up being a success, then yes, right? I mean, I would have to hear the example, right, to really assess it and say what I think about it. But if the failure is the centerpiece, right? Like, and then I failed, but then we led to success because we did these other things and that led to success. Then yes, I would say that's fine, because you answered the question and then it led to success in the future. You never want the main takeaway from this is never answer a failure question with a failure. Answer a failure question with the ultimate ending being success. So like your example of that is pretty similar to mine. Where it ends positively, as long as they address it and say, this actually was a failure at this point, and it answers the interviewer's question.
Makes sense. Okay. We actually have a question on the Q&A, which relates to the loop. And they're asking, to clear the Amazon loop, do a person need to get thumbs up from each person in the loop?
No, not at all. I've actually seen people make offers several times where it was half and half. Half people were inclined, half people were not inclined. I've seen where 2 people were inclined and 5 people were not inclined, and we moved to inclined. I will say a lot of times when that happens, it usually leads to a down leveling. So if you're interviewing for a senior engineer, they may say, well, we really like him. We think he's Amazonian, or she's Amazonian, but we think they're missing this, and this. And we think that they should have some time as a regular engineer before they're ready for the big show at the senior engineer. So, and I mean, I have seen it where they will actually get the level they're interviewing for too. So it just depends. One thing I will say is your example should be, if you happen to not do well in an interview, shake it off, put it in the rearview mirror, and do not think about it, and then move forward. Because if you get other people that are willing to fight for you and think your examples are strong, they will address the risk of that person who said you were not inclined. So don't give up just because you think you had a bad interview.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. So I'm not sure how much time we're at.
We still have time.
So I like to use the director's dilemma when describing how to put together an example. A lot of people are like, how do I put together an example? So think about your favorite directors: James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, right? Some of the best storytellers out there, but they don't just tell a story and regurgitate the details of it. They think about the audience and think about how the audience feels, and they want them to feel something, right? A thriller, you want to feel anxiety. A comedy, you want to feel laughter. And it's the same thing for interviewing, except you want them to feel like hiring you. So just like a director, you have to do it in the right way. So the first thing is the beginning of the example and making sure that the interviewer has a good context or easy to follow beginning and understanding. If you have a stakeholder that has 90% of your revenue, say that, right? Give them understanding, because a lot of times when we're listening to people tell stories, we're visualizing it, right? If I'm talking about a painter painting a apartment complex that's just covered in chalk white, right? You're visualizing that. Same thing for your interviewer. You want to give them that visualization, so you're easing them into the story, you're easing them into that example. The next is the problem, right? So every protagonist has an obstacle they have to overcome in any story. So very similar to that content I was talking about earlier, you want to magnify that problem. The bigger the problem, the bigger your solution. So think about Darth Vader, right? Darth Vader is a really big villain, really big problem. That's one of the reasons why Star Wars is so successful, is because there's that big presence that they have to overcome. Then is the solution, right? So what is the solution? What is your thought process behind the solution? But most importantly, and that's where a lot of people do trip up, is what are your contributions in that solution? A lot of people will say, we did this, we did that, and it's not as clear. As an experienced interviewer, I will ask, I'll say, okay, I thank you for saying we, but what did you specifically do? What were your contributions? But a less experienced interviewer will take you at face value and be like, I don't know what they did. So I don't have enough data points, therefore I'm on the fence and I'm not inclined, right? So reduce that margin of error and say I versus we as much as you can. And then lastly is the impact, right? So the so what? You've gotten here, you told me this great story, but what did it lead to? What revenue did you create? What did you take something from 30 clicks to 1 click? And then most importantly, as you're telling the impact, say it matter of factly. You don't have to sell them. You don't have to be a used car salesman. Just say it, right? And because of that, I went from 30 steps to 1 step. And it was my company really appreciated it, and it led to a lot of value, including increasing the revenue by 55% that year. So just say it, right? There's no need to oversell it. But that's the director's dilemma. I love the analogy because it helps with your ability to tell a cohesive story.
So like your accomplishments speak for you.
Exactly.
Great advice.
Awesome.
Okay.
Moving on. So I'll run through this very quick. So what to expect. So you'll have your recruiter call, recruiter interview at Amazon. Typically, you'll move into a tech screen if it's a tech role. If the tech screen goes well, you'll then move to on-site loop. More senior level roles, you'll do a tech screen and then do a hiring manager interview. If it's a non-tech role, typically you'll do a hiring manager interview, or you'll do a peer interview and then a hiring manager interview before you go to the on-site loop. The on-site loop, this is the gauntlet. This is where things get tough. So usually it's 5 or 6 people that you're interviewing with, and they're all assigned 2 leadership principles. These are 45 minutes to an hour, typically. Don't go into this saying the same example over and over again. It's a surefire way not to get the job. You want to think about the math on this. So if you're interviewing with 5 people, they're all going to cover 2 leadership principles. You're getting at least 10 examples that you're going to have to come up with. I would say if you run into a situation where you can't think of anything, then use the second example twice. I've seen people who've gotten the job who've done example more than once, and it does happen. But if you use the same example over and over again, you're definitely not getting the job. It's just how it works, unfortunately. So you got to think of a lot.
You don't want to be a one-trick pony.
That's right, one-trick pony, or they're going to down level you, or they're going to say you don't have as much experience as we think you do, right? And then lastly is the debrief. So debriefs is where they all meet in a room and they will weigh your strengths, your weaknesses, and they'll analyze them against all the leadership principles: strength, mild concern, and basically they'll say, hey, we're, and then they'll make a decision after 30 minutes, and they'll say we're inclined to hire or we're not inclined to hire. If you're not inclined to hire, you'll be moving to a recycle or a reject. But hopefully, the goal is that you get to that offer, right? And then lastly is the offer itself. I actually offer a negotiation package that I can help out with this. I'm about to go over Amazon's compensation philosophy too, so we can talk through that. we get any questions on that, Anna?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking at. I was just going to present one. So someone is asking how many questions typically get asked in a 45, 60-minute slot. So assuming the loop.
Good question. So typically, it depends on if you have 45-minute or 60-minute. So 60-minute, it could be a lot more than 45-minute. Something else you got to think about is your communication style. Are you more verbose? Are you more vague? Because if you're super vague and you're giving them 1-minute examples, first of all, if it's 1-minute example, it's not going to get you to where you want to be. I'll go ahead and tell you that. Second of all, you're going to burn through like 6 or 7 examples if you're doing 1-minute interviews. You do the math on that, 7 examples times 5 interviewers, that's 35 examples you're going to come up with. So if you think about, the 3 to 5 minute and the follow-up questions, the intro, it can be anywhere depending on your communication style. I would say most of the time it runs somewhere between 3 and 4 questions. An hour is definitely 4, 2 questions for each leadership principle. And it also depends on the follow-up. I've had many, many interviews where I only asked 1 question and I spent the entire interview doing follow-up questions. And I've seen both scenarios where I've asked 1 question, went through the entire interview with the 1 question and I was inclined on the person, and one where I was not inclined on the person. So it just truly depends on your interviewer, their level of detail and how much detail they want. But I mean, I would, and Anna can jump in on this too, but I would say it's safe to say the average is probably around 4 for an hour.
Yeah, 100% agree. I always say that too, like 3 or 4. That's my scariest nightmare, the 1 questioner interviewer. When there's literally just 1 and good luck and just broken
Right.
questions. We do have another question asking, what does it take to get to the loop? So to get through the recruiter call and get through the hiring manager or tech screen.
As far as like number of examples, I would say, 4 or 5 is all you need to prepare for max, just so you can have some alternate examples prepared for that interview. It's definitely not nearly as difficult as the on-site. And one thing about the hiring manager interview that's a little bit different than on-site is the hiring manager interview is they have a lot more autonomy to select their questions. There's not really like a bank of questions or a leadership principle to focus on. Whereas the on-site loop, it's way more difficult, but it's a lot more formulatic because they will have 2 leadership principles tied to each person, and they will be asking specific questions going into it before it even starts, right? So it's like it's all tied to those leadership principles. But I would say it's really all the same thing. Think about big examples that you've come up with, some career defining moments you've worked with, and then and use those with a hiring manager. Try and think of the big 2 or big 3. And a lot of times you can reuse the hiring manager interview again when you get to the loop.
Great, and thank you for the answer, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll run through this right quick. So you made it to offer, good job. You nailed the loop, you nailed the hiring manager phone screen, you nailed the tech screen. Everyone wants you on board, right? So when Amazon makes an offer, it's a 4-year projection of your compensation, right? So it's a little bit different. Most companies like base salary or base salary and bonus, but Amazon does 3 components. They do a base salary, they do a sign-on bonus, and they do stock that they offer you. This is it's a combination. So they really have a total compensation model. That, I would say if you're going to negotiate, and of course I offer the package. So if you want to use me as a negotiator, happy to help out in this area, is to really focus on that total compensation number. Don't focus on a base, don't focus on a sign-on, don't focus on a set number of shares, because that's not really how it works and how they create their offers. Something else to remember is there's a base cap at Amazon. So if you're a higher level role, most of your compensation will be in stock. And that's really the same too for the other levels. Stock is a really big driver of their compensation philosophy. And I recommend that you really factor that into it, because you could be taking a base that's where you're at or not much more than where you're at, and you're being compensated more in the long term, which is more Amazon's philosophy. Is the long term is what they focus on. They also do a 15% year-over-year appreciation. They factor into that. So your stock and your 4 is actually going to be valued 45% higher than it would be today, just because they know that it's going to go up, and that's part of your comp as well. You also want to negotiate because the raises are typically small if you're a middle of the road performer. They're good for top performers, but the raises, it's something to think about, because if you're not, you don't know what your performance is going to be, right? You've been great at your past job, but you have no idea how you're going to do at Amazon. So you want to think about that as you're negotiating, because this is the big time when you can negotiate all that, because internally it's a lot harder. Even when you get promotions, they typically only bring you to the bottom of the next level. And then lastly, annual reviews are focused on outlook years. So for example, year 3, you'll get stock for year 5. And it's a little bit different than your normal company offers compensation. So do we have any questions on that, Anna?
Not on this one. We do have a few. Actually, a lot of people are interested on the bar raiser, and it seems like something infamous. So loads of them would just like to know how can they prepare for the bar raiser. So it's a slightly different topic than compensation.
Yeah, so the bar raiser is tough. I'll just go ahead and move us into Q&A. The bar raiser is tough. They go through a really intensive training program that they have to go through to be certified as a bar raiser, and they're shadowed by other bar raisers. And if they get anything less than a 4 or 5 on their rating, they won't be certified. So it's a very tough process. I'll say when I went through it, it was some of the best feedback I've ever gotten in my career, and it really elevated my ability to raise my standards on how I evaluate people, and I actually assess people. I feel like a lot of times interviewers, they don't know how to assess talent, and in the bar raiser training program, you really learn how to do that. So to appease a bar raiser, you really have to bring your best examples, because they want to know the impact. Okay, great. What did this lead to? What did this lead to? What did you do in the problem? They're going to really be diving into a lot more follow-up questions than a typical interviewer would. Something else to remember about a bar raiser is you need the hiring manager and the bar raiser to say yes for you to get an offer. Those two have to say yes. And the bar raiser is the only person that can veto a hiring manager. So if a hiring manager really likes a candidate and the bar raiser says there's too much risk, I'm not moving forward, they cannot make an offer to that candidate. The bar raiser can veto a hiring manager anytime. They are also not as warm and fuzzy as most interviewers. I'm not saying that all bar raisers are like that, but a lot of they're trained to not focus on someone's personality, right? They're trained on focusing on the examples and the examples themselves. So they almost separate you from what comes out of your mouth as soon as you get there. So like you've talked, you said your stuff, let's huddle down with all this stuff that he's given me. Let's turn our back to the person, because this is what matters, what came out of his mouth. So like a lot of time, and I think it's a good thing too, because it's a lot of that objectivity in the process, whereas like a lot of companies are like, I didn't like the way the guy was talking, or I thought he came across as too arrogant or something like that. They won't do that. They will take your example, they will review it, they'll take copious notes, and they will analyze that and say, this is what we got from this person, and this is what we should go by. Does this stand up on its own or not? If it doesn't, they're not inclined. So I would just say, really focus on the impact, really think about the big problems that you need to solve. Prepare just like you would for another interviewer. One hard part about it is you're not going to know who the bar raiser is typically. I will give you a hint though, it's usually the person that has nothing to do with your group. So if you have somebody that's interviewing, let's say you're interviewing for sales, and you have this random, they're doing the satellites now. You have a satellite analyst on your loop. Like, why is there a satellite analyst on the loop? Most likely that's the bar raiser, because the bar raisers can interview on any kind of loop anywhere, which I think is why it creates so much value and why so many people do it. At least for me, because I got to interview a wide swath of industries that I had no knowledge in, but I knew how to interview. So I would say that there's not a ton you can do to prepare, but really practice your best examples and look out for that person that has experience that's not quite in your realm.
I think we're hearing so many great tips around the Amazon processes. There's actually a good one for me as well, because those are the times people are asking, oh, who's the bar raiser on this? And I'm like, well, I wouldn't know. also I don't want to look either, because I'm like, it shouldn't matter really. But if I wanted to look, it would be hard for me to say who is. So next time I'll look out for the rocket scientist and hopefully spot him. Great. Actually, we do have some questions. Let's see how we do with time. Oh, we're fine. Regarding compensation, and some are asking if they gave a certain figure to the recruiter and the initial call, how hard is it to negotiate up an offer on the back of that?
Good question. And so you're not supposed to do that, right? Don't give an answer. You want to deflect as much as possible. Oh, I'm more interested in the scope, and I'm more interested in what the team, deflect as much as you can. But if you do give that response, you have a little wild card, right, in your back pocket. It's called a promotion or a competing offer. So if you have that promotion that's coming down the line, or you feel like a promotion's happening, or you have a competing offer, then things change, right? So like in negotiating, whenever that number gets dropped, it's called the anchor. So when the anchor gets dropped, everything is going to negotiate around the anchor, no matter what. I recommend, if you are going to give a number to a recruiter and you just want to skip all the noise and skip all like the dating game, right? Then I highly recommend thinking to yourself and saying to yourself, what is my thrill number? And the thrill number is, what is the number that when you get it, you're going to run to it. You're going to be super excited to go to it. And this number is only defined by you. Remember, comparison is the thief of joy. So whenever you find out that your teammate or your peer is making more than you, it doesn't matter if you get your thrill number or not. You're going to be upset by it because you're going to be like, he's making more money than me and we're doing the same thing. The fact of the matter is, you're probably doing better than 99th percentile of the people in that role if you got your thrill number. It's just one person that makes more money than you. So I would say to you, if you get that offer that is what you're thrilled by, then accept it. You can always ask for more, right? I have a theory in negotiation. Even if you get your thrill number, always ask for more money one last time. And then if you get more money, you get more money. It's icing on the cake. And as my grandma would say, that's gravy on the biscuit. That's a southern phrase for you guys.
My favorite biscuit.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully that's helpful.
Absolutely. Also on the back of that, we had another question. What do you think would be a good source to just know what's the Amazon salary? So if let's say the recruiter is a bit more pushy, they're pushing you on a figure, how would you then know what's at least average at Amazon?
So there are a lot of resources out there. We are in a very fortunate time. Amazon is in the great resignation is happening. Companies are tossing offers to people that I have never seen before, right? Left and right. They're trying to compete with each other. Inflation is happening, and companies know this, right? And especially in the tech world, there's in the U.S. at least, there's 2 million more job openings than there are people are employed or unemployed. So there's a lot going on, and companies are being a lot more lax on those ranges. So if you had a bad experience recently, that might not be the case today. With a recruiter pushing back, and recruiters are having a hard time hiring too. The second thing is there's Blind. If you have never been on Blind before, Blind is a great resource to understanding the market data of what's going on, especially in tech. You can find pretty much any offer out there for any company and by level, and it's real data. And you can even ask Blind if it's a fair offer, and the community will respond to you and tell you. FYI.levels is also a very valuable data trove of information. So I highly recommend checking that out as well. So, I would, and another thing is negotiations poker, right? If you have that data already proactively, you can play your poker game a lot better. It's a lot easier to play poker when you can see somebody else's cards. So I recommend doing as much research as you can, understanding the range, understanding the role. A big company like Amazon has a lot of data behind it. Now, if you're going to go work for a startup that's a year or two old, it's going to be a lot harder. I mean, no one's really going to be able to help you there because there's no data on that. But highly recommend sticking to Blind. It's been very helpful for me in my career and helpful for a lot of the clients that I've coached. I've seen people who have gotten $100,000 raises in their total compensation just because they went on Blind and started reaching out. So highly recommend that.
Great, thank you. And there's one last question regarding compensation. So onto this topic, I think it's a quite sort of common knowledge that there's a salary cap at Amazon. I mean, I've seen that information online on many platforms, but this question is actually around if there's this cap on every level.
There is. Every level has it. I mean, I did executive recruiting. I mean, you're asking executives to take 400, 500K pay cuts on their base salary and then being paid completely all in stock. So it's every level.
Great.
It is high. I will say the cap is a little bit higher in San Francisco and in New York than it is in other regions though, but not by a lot.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's see some other questions, because I think we still have about 5 minutes on this webinar. And we do have a bit more questions regarding the bar raiser. It really looks like a super hot topic today. And here's one which is asking if the bar raiser is asking only leadership principles or regarding more technical stuff as well.
No, the bar raiser will stick to leadership principles. There's actually, if you're a technical person, like if you're listening to this and you're SDE, there'll be one person that will be assigned to doing just your technical screen. Everything else is going to be LP. So it is 90% leadership principles, 10% tech. So leak code, if you know what leak code is. So focus on the leadership principles, and if you're going to be able to focus on the bar raiser, definitely focus on the LPs. I think you're on mute, Anna.
Yes, I am. Sorry, because I was just answering some questions in the chat. I think we're about to finish. So let me put some links onto the chat. Here's the one for Eric, actually. So, oh no, not this one. Well, that just failed miserably from my side because I had something else on the copying tray. So if anyone would like to get a session with you, what would be easiest for them to get in touch? How does Carrus work?
Sure. So if you would like to get a session with me, I have my my Carrus profile here available. Happy to speak with anyone that's interested. Just go on the link. You can buy one of my packages. We actually have a package for this event that's discounted at a deeper rate than my normal discount rate. So that's available. And how many days is that? Do you know? I think it's 10 days.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so it's available for 10 days if you want to do that, which I do 3 sessions in that package where we can do 3 hour set or an hour, 3 separate hour sessions where we can focus and dig deep into your personalized interview style, because every person has that different communication style. But yeah, just go on my Carrus profile and then and buy one of those packages, and then we can schedule some time to meet based on your availability and my availability.
Amazing. I'm also, so the link is now here on the chat box. I'm also putting the link for any and every coaches and Carrus. So if anyone would like to browse over, feel free, and you're more than welcome. And yes, this recording will be shared. I think both on the website and on our LinkedIn page as well. And I do believe we're going to put it on YouTube too. So great. Yeah, I think we're just on time. So I'd just like to thank everyone for participating on tonight's webinar, and special thanks to Eric for sharing his knowledge with us. It's been super valuable. I really hope that everyone found something interesting in it, and we all learned something regarding the Amazon Loop.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Appreciate you coming.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.